Well, much like I did for the winter of 1982, I wanted to make a video for the spring of 1982 and give my power rankings, if you will, for both the top 10 territories of that spring and the top 20 wrestlers of that spring. And of course, this is just my opinion, but as always, I would love to hear your opinions in the comments about the spring of 1982. And who you think was the top 20 wrestlers, or at least your top wrestlers of the season, and the top territories that season. If you're following along with all of my videos, thank you all for watching. But let's get to it. The top 10 territories. Much like the winter, there's like 11 main territories that I'm kind of covering here. Now, in the spring, I did include Houston a little, but it was just a match. It wasn't the actual territory. And there was Hogan appearing in New Japan. But New Japan, All Japan was better than New Japan in the 80s and 90s, in my opinion. From what I've seen of both anyway. I've seen more All Japan than New Japan, though, to be fair. But still, that remains that one territory must end outside of the top 10. In the winter, it was World Class Championship Wrestling. However, in the spring, it was the AWA. I don't have the AWA in the top 10 for the spring of 1982. And a lot of that has to just do with Vern's booking. Now look, I know there's some AWA loyalists out there that still swear by the AWA. And I must say that the AWA was the first pro wrestling I ever saw as a very young kid, towards the end of the AWA though. This is long after 1982, so the AWA, I do have some nostalgia with later AWA. Not so much nostalgia with 1982 AWA. And even outside of the booking for Hulk Hogan, which is of course a big flop in the booking of Vern, to not push Hogan to the moon after you see what happened when the WWF eventually pushes Hogan to the moon. Even outside of that, Vern's booking is boring. It's kind of every single month it's the same matches over and over, which granted there are territories that do that, but other territories outside of the AWA have more feuds. In the AWA you have the tag title feud, you have Hogan and Bockwinkle, or I guess Hogan versus the Heenan family. But outside of that, there's no mid-card feuds really that are anything interesting. So the AWA, not in my top 10. And of course, the main reason, though, has to be because why not give Hogan the title? Like, okay, you don't push Hogan to the moon, but why not even give him the title? I guess it has to go back to Vern's style of wrestling that he likes, and Hogan didn't do that style. For the spring, my number 10 is WCCW. It makes the top 10, unlike the winter. We got to see Fritz von Erich's retirement, which is the first step in the WCCW improving in quality, in my opinion. Getting Fritz out of the way, because for the first half of 1982, all roads still led to Fritz von Erich. And there was somebody in the comments of the WCCW video for the spring saying that plenty of owners or bookers of a territory put themselves over. So of course Fritz put himself over even at the age of 54. And that's fair. But I feel like other territories can kind of hide that. Whereas in WCCW, the only stories on television are Fritz von Erich and his sons and anybody that's going against them. Similar to that of the AWA, there's just not a lot of strength in the mid-card to keep the entire cards interesting. So I just don't feel like, in my opinion, pre-Freebirds WCCW has aged very good at all. It's a boring territory. At number 9, I put All Japan Pro Wrestling. It's down one spot from the winter. Even though I did enjoy the spring, I enjoyed the Champion Carnival tournament mostly. So it had its highlights. It had Bruiser Brody causing havoc in All Japan during that tournament. And just in general. But I still think comparing All Japan at that point to a lot of these other territories, which again, you get different flavors in pro wrestling. You know, there are the people that love Japanese style wrestling. They love that. You have the people nowadays that somehow love all the flipping and flopping and flying with no psychology. Yes, there are fans that like that. I'm not one of them, but there are fans that love that. You have the fans that love the interesting booking and twists and turns and the character building, the story arcs, if you will. Some fans don't like to call it stories, but I'm one that enjoys the stories and the characters in pro wrestling. And that goes along with the hot feuds that we see in some of these other territories. Not that All Japan doesn't have hot feuds. You have Stan Hansen and Giant Baba, and even Bruiser and Baba now. So they have their share of feuds, but I just don't think it has as many flavors as you can get in some of these other territories at the top, especially in the spring of 1982. Number 8 is my big drop. In the winter of 82, I had MidSouth at number 2. In the spring of 1982, MidSouth Pro Wrestling drops to number 8 in my power rankings. And why is that? For some reason in the spring, Bill Watts decided to let pettiness decide all of his booking. When Killer Carl Cox left the territory, out of, I think, spite and pettiness, Bill Watts decided to give Dick Murdoch the exact same gimmick. And it was just stupid. It wasn't good television. So you give... It looks dumb when somebody already has a gimmick on 1 week on TV, and then the next week of TV you're giving the exact same gimmick to another person. Like, that is insulting your fan base, in my opinion. So, long before Vince McMahon Jr. did petty booking, Bill Watts was doing some petty booking. And it doesn't help that at the same time you have Precious Paul Ellering and his gym teacher gimmick that is, I think, both awkward and bad. It takes away from Mid-South overall. So blame Bill Watts' petty booking in the spring for me dropping that territory down. At number 7, going up 3 spots, is Pacific Northwest Wrestling, or Portland Wrestling, as a lot of people like to call it. I enjoyed the feuds we got in Portland. Buddy Rose, of course, carries a lot of that territory, but he carries it very well. I enjoyed seeing Kurt and Larry Hennig coming into the territory and really causing some havoc with the Army faction. And then when Buddy Rose goes to the WWF to shoot some TV and goes to Japan to have some matches, the Army's doing good without him, so that when he returns, we get the face turn from Matt Bourne. So I thought we had some solid storytelling out of this territory for the spring. A lot was thanks to Buddy Rose. He's a good promo, which we'll get to in my top 20. At number 6, going up 1 spot, the WWF. It helps the WWF that it had those big stadium shows that aired on networks like Prism and Madison Square Garden. Those were on TV in New York and Philadelphia. So you get to see those shows now so far in the future that it helps build stars better. And I think that probably happened back then too, that you build up wrestlers better when you have that kind of TV time, and you can put main shows that would be house shows anywhere else. In any other territory, you don't get to see the house shows on TV. In the WWF, you get to see the house shows on TV, and so you get to see these feuds culminate. And I think that really helps. So getting to see that for the WWF, it's easy to put it higher in my top 10. Still not in my top 5, though, because my top 5 continues to be... It's hard to get into this top 5. 1982, these territories were on fire. Such good shit out of these territories. Number 5, up 1 spot, I put Georgia. You still got the Piper and Bob Armstrong feud. You got Piper whipping people with belts, belting not only Armstrong, but belting Tommy Rich for getting involved in all of that. You had a very entertaining feud between Dusty Rhodes and Ole Anderson, where Dusty Rhodes is cutting some entertaining and funny promos. So Georgia, just a very entertaining territory. I still think what it's missing that a lot of these other territories above it have is, outside of Piper and Armstrong, some of these other territories have more long-term feuds, where I feel like Georgia has more short-term feuds, which does well building up their Omni shows every so often, very often. So, I don't know. I just would like a little more long-term booking out of Georgia, I guess. Number 4 is MidAtlantic. Down one spot. I think MidAtlantic has a lot going for it, too. You got a lot of stars there. You got Flair there from time to time. You got Piper there being entertaining with his feud now with Jack Briscoe there. You get Slaughter involved in a lot of different feuds still. I think Slaughter is the main person, however. Like, Piper's entertaining, of course, but Slaughter is kind of the main draw of MidAtlantic at this point, with everybody always trying to take him down. He loses his title for a bit because the territory did something very interesting. Where they changed their rules kind of for a month. They still had draws though, even though they said they weren't going to do that on TV. They did still have draws, so they kind of lied to their audience. But for a month, they did put their plan into place to not have disqualification, so that there could be winners. And I like that played a part in certain feuds. So I like that outside of the box stuff from MidAtlantic there. Now, number 3, unfortunately, isn't going to stay this high because there's just not enough footage of it for the rest of 1982. But Southeastern Championship Wrestling, wow, what an underrated territory. I think if we still had more footage from this territory, it would be regarded as one of the best territories. This territory knows how to book a feud, knows how to have different hot feuds going on at once. You have the Freebirds feuding with each other, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. That was very entertaining. It kind of culminates into this soap opera-like scene, which for 1982 in pro wrestling, ahead of its time, honestly, where they are kind of burying the hatchet after Terry Gordy saves Michael Hayes from a beatdown and getting his head saved, even though Terry Gordy just beat him in a cage match, and a loser leaves town cage match nonetheless. But man, that was great. And then you have Joe LeDuc and Jacques Rougeau, 2 Canadians in Alabama, which is still funny to me, and I say that all the time in the comments when people comment on those videos. But that feud gets hot too when LeDuc wants such revenge on Rougeau because of Rougeau beating him for the title. It continues to get more and more personal, where he has the ether and knocks out Rougeau and shaves his head. So that territory, they know how to do their heels well, and they know how to make their baby faces have sympathy. Jacques Rougeau, you get sympathy on Jacques Rougeau, which happens to him shaving his head, being drugged, basically. That was good. What a hot territory. I love it. I'm sad that there's not more footage from that territory. Number 2, going up 2 spots, CWA Memphis. You still had Lawler and Dutch Mantell in a hot feud, and you had Jimmy Hart and his family still running wild, injuring a bunch of people. That was one of the main stories for the spring, was Hart and his faction just injuring people left and right, where they kind of played into the Lawler and Dutch Mantell feud too, which I enjoyed, where Dutch Mantell fakes out Lawler that they should just bury the hatchet and not have the loser leave town match that they kind of talked themselves into. They need to work together to go after Hart and the family, and that was Dutch Mantell just suckering Lawler in and beating him down, and that was fun. But the main thing has to be something still talked about to this day, and that is the Lawler and Andy Kaufman feud, which, I mean, what more can you say about that? Andy Kaufman came into wrestling embracing kayfabe totally, because he already did his own kind of kayfabe in Hollywood. But then just wrestling women, being so misogynistic and getting heat on himself, it was brilliant. And then to have Lawler be the big face coming in to challenge him and injure him, and then he's threatening to sue Lawler. That's such great entertaining television. Like, I know there is the old school fans, and probably a lot of them maybe, that don't like their sports entertainment with pro wrestling. But CWA Memphis is sports entertainment before sports entertainment was cool. The CWA was really the first territory to involve stars in their territory, and Andy Kaufman is that star. So I love it. It's just such an entertaining watch to watch CWA. But the most entertaining watch, and still the number one territory, just like it was in the winter, nobody has been able to dethrone it yet. That is Championship Wrestling from Florida. Eddie Graham is such an underrated booker still, I think. I think Bill Watts gets a lot of credit. That should maybe go to Eddie Graham. They do a lot of stuff. Great. Like, you have the Butch Reed and Ric Flair feud. Flair's upset that Butch Reed pinned him, so those two go back and forth in house shows. But then you have it on television where Flair gets humiliated by Butch Reed with getting his suit torn off, which was Flair's great idea to have a tearaway suit. Just brilliant stuff there for that feud. And then you get this huge monster push of the Black Ninja, Kendo Nagasaki, where he is making everybody bleed internally and their blood's coming out of their mouth. Like, how can you get a heel over better than watching him make people bleed out of their mouths in 1982? And even attacks Eddie Graham. So Eddie Graham letting himself be a victim to this heel that they're pushing. And of course, J.J. Dillon being a great mouthpiece for him. Great. And they even have the story where J.J. Dillon buys Jim Garvin's contract, makes him the richest wrestler in wrestling. So because he has all this faith in Jimmy Garvin. They have a lot going for it in Florida still. Dusty Rhodes returning, being entertaining. Florida's a great territory, and it's still the best one in my opinion. Nothing has dethroned Florida in my eyes, even though there's so many strong territories in 1982, so much great pro wrestling television. Like, these days you have all these indie wrestling stuff, and you got all the Japan wrestling, and you got AEW, WWE, Impact, and yet somehow most of it all feels the exact same. And it takes away from being entertaining. Whereas you could watch these old territories and you get different flavors in different territories, but not just different flavors in different territories. Most of them are all great and entertaining in their own ways. And there's different styles of booking. I love it. I love it. So Florida's still the king, though, when it comes to booking. All right, let's get to the top 20 pro wrestlers of the spring in 1982, in my opinion, of course. We are going to start with the wrestlers that didn't make the top 20, that did make it in the winter. Greg Valentine, I had him way up at number 3 in the winter. He's not in the top 20 here. Let me say this, though. It's because I give 10 points in each of these categories to all these wrestlers. In character or persona, how strong their persona is or is being built up. Their promo work, of course. Their in-ring work, of course. And then lastly, their story and feud for that season. And Greg Valentine didn't really have a big story and feud in the spring. It just he carried over his feud with Pedro Morales from the winter, but it was not nearly as strong as it was in the winter. So I had to drop Valentine out of the top 20. I dropped Adrian Adonis out of the top 20 for similar reasons. He too just feuding with Pedro Morales after losing his feud with Backlund. It's something WWF does that I don't like. You just go from feuding for the world title, and then the heel is unsuccessful feuding for the world title, so they move down to the Intercontinental title, where they're also unsuccessful always. It's a bit redundant. Steamboat's out of my top 20. He just didn't get enough face time. I think he was in Japan a lot, just wrestling matches, so we didn't get to see any promos or character work or really storylines. Heenan drops out of my top 20. I love Bobby Heenan. If I keep doing this throughout the 80s, Heenan's going to be high on my list certain years. But he drops out here because the AWA feud kind of getting a little stale already between Hogan and Bockwinkle. Bob Armstrong drops out of my top 20, and Dutch Mantel drops out of my top 20. A few wrestlers that are also just outside of my top 20 that didn't make it in the winter or the spring. Ted DiBiase and Junkyard Dog, kind of both in Mid-South a lot. Although we did see DiBiase in Japan, which was fun, and we saw Junkyard Dog in Houston trying to get Bockwinkle's AWA title. I love both those wrestlers, honestly. They're just right outside my top 20. DiBiase, I don't like his promo work or his character work. He doesn't really have a character yet. He's about to in the summer, which is going to be fun. But in the winter and the spring, his character, his persona is very undefined in the Mid-South. He's just a kind of lukewarm babyface. A Junkyard Dog is obviously always fun too, but he doesn't have a main story or feud yet. David Von Erich, right outside my top 20. I loved his villain work in Florida, which is over now, sadly. I even thought his promos were very fun. He was very close to being my top 20. He just fell like 1 point short. And Blackjack Mulligan also fell 1 point short, who I thought did a very good job in the WWF. He had a fun feud with Backlund and then a even funner feud with Andre the Giant, trying to be the new giant in the WWF. But the real giant in the WWF does make my top 20 at number 20. Andre, obviously just a spectacle that he is, but I liked some of the booking for him in the WWF during the spring. They kind of teased him winning the tag titles, even though it ended up not being so because one of the 2 out of 3 falls was a disqualification. And then he goes and has that feud with Blackjack Mulligan. But the thing I enjoy about Andre back in these early 80s is he's kind of humanized in his promos. They do a lot of like interviews with him where I think he talks like a regular person, where he will eventually become a cartoon, although most of the WWF became a cartoon during the Hulkamania era. But in 1982, you get Andre just sitting down, chilling and talking to you, and I enjoy that out of his promo work. At number 19, how can I not put Kendo Nagasaki in the top 20 after such a monster push in Florida? I like his style of wrestling. They try and make it seem like mixed martial arts. But I mostly like how he just making people bleed out of the mouth with their blood pills you could chew on and make it seem like you're bleeding out of the mouth. I like it. I like that they're pushing the Black Ninja as this crazy cool heel down in Florida. We don't get a lot of promo out of him, and that's why J.J. Dillon is at number 18. He's obviously carries the villain promos for a lot of wrestlers down in Florida. And like I said in the winter, I like to include managers in my top 20 because they should be graded on these same things. They can be graded in persona. They could be graded in promo. They're probably better at those two things than most of the wrestlers if you're a good manager. And most of these managers wrestled in the day. Not necessarily as good as some of the wrestlers, but they did. And JJ is always involved in feuds and stories. So JJ Dillon, even though I think he dropped like 4 spots, he's still in my top 20. Number 17 is a very underrated individual. Joe LeDuc is so interesting to watch down in Southeastern Championship Wrestling. I love that he's feuding with another Canadian, like I mentioned earlier in this video. But he's such a menacing figure. Like, if I was an adult in 1982, I would have never wanted to run into Joe LeDuc. He's just one of those villains who very intimidating. Like, sure, yeah, there's a lot of these villains back in the day that are huge or just big men. But LeDuc just has a certain look. Like, wouldn't want to mess with that guy. He might pull my eye out. So I love his character work in Southeastern. His promo work could be a little rough, but he's French-Canadian and he's speaking English, so he does the best that he can there. And of course, he has this very hot feud with Jacques Rougeau, so the Duke had to be in my top 20 this go-round. And somebody else that had to be in my top 20 this go-round at number 16, Buddy Rhodes. What another excellent promo. He's another entertaining villain on the mic. To me, he's kind of like, these days, for the past 3 decades now probably, so many villains just wanted to be the cool villain. Oh, you're out there, you're the bad guy, but you want to be cool. I feel like Buddy Rhodes might have been one of the first to do so. I mean, I guess the argument can be made for Ric Flair too. They came up in wrestling together. So maybe Buddy Rhodes wasn't the first. Maybe it was Flair. But Buddy Rhodes is kind of a cool heel in Portland. And maybe that has to do with he's such a big star there. He's like one of the focal points of Portland wrestling. But he almost comes up like a tweener sometimes. Like, is he really supposed to be a heel right now? Or is he supposed to be a babyface with the way he cuts a promo? Because it's so entertaining. I don't know. But I like it. Even though I don't like so many cool heels these days because there's just so many of them. But Buddy Rhodes was good. And then you get to see him in the WWF cut an amazing promo where he's attacking the fans who are attacking him. So he's not a cool heel in the WWF. So that's versatile there. So Buddy Rhodes at 16. Number 15 is Jimmy Hart, who goes up one spot. Jimmy Hart might be the most underrated manager of the 80s, because if you just know him from other territories like the WWF or WCW in the 90s, you might not think that Jimmy Hart is a good manager, honestly, because in the WWF and WCW, most of the time he wasn't great. He was just the same kind of promos. But in Memphis, he's amazing. He's amazing on the microphone. And he wrestles chicken style in matches. He's always involved in the feud. He's the main person in the Jimmy Hart family. It seems like he's at the forefront making his wrestlers injure people. How could you not love Jimmy Hart as a villain? Number 14, Hulk Hogan. He drops 4 spots here, and a lot of that just has to do with the booking. Like, you get the fake out where it seems like he wins the AWA title, but it's just a fake out. We got to see him in Japan, though, and a lot of people appreciate his work in Japan being so different from his American style, and I do too. I think Hogan mostly dropped in my rankings because some people went up, and one person got into my top 20 for the first time. And number 13, Bob Orton Jr. I really enjoyed his push in the WWF. I liked that it focused on his finishing maneuver, the superplex, especially in a day and age like today where no move means anything, not even finishers. It seems like they will just kick out of any finisher just to kick out and say, I had a good match because I kicked out. But Orton protecting his finisher, and I especially like that when it got to his title shot against Backlund for the title, they still kept his finisher strong. He didn't get Backlund in a finisher and he kicked out. No, Backlund just got out of the finisher and didn't let it happen. So I thought Orton along with Backlund told a good story in that match. At number 12 is Terry Gordy. He goes up like 7 spots here. His feud with Michael Hayes just entertained me a ton. And Hayes is such an entertaining individual that he could probably carry a feud himself if he had to. But I thought Gordy carried his own here, being entertaining. He was funny in some promos. He was good at being a chicken shit heel when he had to be against Michael Hayes. And then you get what I talked about earlier is his soap opera-like moment with Michael Hayes in the back where he finally apologizes for all that's been happening because he wanted to make a name for himself. He felt like he wasn't getting the spotlight in the Freebirds, and it fit the character. So I love it. So big ups to Gordy there. 11, Paul Orndorf. He stays in the exact same spot I had him in the winter. We got to see him lose his feud in Mid-South, but then he goes to Georgia and wins Georgia's title. So Orndorf, my only thing about Orndorf, why he still hasn't broken my top 10, is I don't like his promos. Maybe that's just a personal thing for me. So my promo grade for Orndorf remains on the lower side. But he's great in the ring. I would like to see some more character development from him too, but he went from a heel turned babyface in Mid-South to a babyface in Georgia. I hope him as a champion in the summer will make him be a better persona. We'll see. At number 10, Butch Reed goes up 2 spots. It goes to a story here with Flair. I thought Butch Reed held his own in that story with Flair, humiliating Flair when he had to humiliate Flair. He does good in matches against Flair, which isn't hard to do because it's Flair. But I thought Butch Reed carries his own in those matches too. He's good at staying in character, being a strong man. He does a lot of drop kicks though, but he does them well most of the time. So I still love Butch Reed. He's at number 10. Number 9, Bob Backlund. He falls 4 spots. It's because his promos. And you get a lot of comments in the WWF videos about how Backlund's bad at a promo. And he just is. I've heard people talk that he used to do his promos like a natural athlete, which is kind of awkward. Some athletes are awkward being interviewed after games, at least back in the day. Sure, maybe, but then you get the promo where Backlund tries to cry, fake cry. And I think that's the spring of 82 part 2. Go back and watch that video and watch how as soon as Vince dismisses Backlund from his fairly bad fake crying, before Backlund is out of the picture frame, he goes back into normal face. It's a split second, but still, like, you couldn't wait till you're off of camera to pretend that you weren't pretending to cry even though it was bad anyway. So Backlund, great feuds. I mean, he's constantly in different feuds with good heels, and he carries his own in matches, obviously. He's a great technician. But his promo work I had to fault him for his promo work. At number 8, Jerry Lawler, also in the exact same spot he was in the winter. He had a great feud with Dutch, a very entertaining feud with Andy Kaufman. And yeah, so Lawler still strong there. I'm about to have some controversy here, though, here in a few spots. At number 7, Michael Hayes, like I talked about with Terry Gordy. I just love that feud. I thought both men were entertaining. I do think Hayes is the more entertaining of the two and slightly better at promo work. He goes up 2 spots from where I had him in the winter. He does his style of in-ring work. I can't fault him for that. I think Hayes is one of the more entertaining wrestlers of the entire 80s, honestly. And I don't know if he still gets the credit for that. At number 6, Nick Bockwinkle. He goes up a spot. Bockwinkle is just a very well-rounded wrestler. He's right outside the top 5 only because I have one controversial person in my top 5. But Bockwinkle, he has Heenan as a manager, but he doesn't need Heenan to talk for him because he could cut a great promo. He's traveling the world having good wrestling matches. We saw him in Japan. You see him in Houston and, of course, AWA. And he has a feud with Hogan that's, I think, is getting old. But that's my only fault for him because he's great at the other 3 things. I think he has a good persona of his own. All right, at number 5, this is maybe my controversy. You all might disagree, but I had to do it. The 5th best wrestler of the spring of 82 was Andy Kaufman. And this is because such a good villain. Like, his persona, top notch. His promo work, top notch. Sure, in the ring against women, I mean, he makes it look realistic because I think some of it was with him wrestling some of those women. He makes that look real. Now, of course, when he's fighting Lawler, it's just a squash, but like that fits the character too. Everything about the Andy Kaufman feud was perfected between Lawler and Kaufman. And I have Kaufman ahead of Lawler here, and that's just because I think it's easier to give heels the credit when it comes to feuds and storylines being entertaining. But Kaufman pulled it off seamlessly. He's so good at it. And he deserves the respect for that, for, you know, transcending pro wrestling into the mainstream. And he will continue to do that over the next year in Memphis. Now, the only reason he's not higher is that I think the top four are just as good, but honestly better when it comes to the combination of character and promo work. Slaughter at number 4, he goes up 2 spots. Slaughter carries MidAtlantic on TV a lot of the time with various feuds, everybody trying to take him down. He's good at talking crap about fellow wrestlers like Wahoo McDaniel. Even after he loses the title, he has a stable with the Privates. Slaughter still has such a lot going for him that I had to put him even higher than I did the first time. And I think a lot of that has to do with his promo style growing on me from the winter to the spring. He can make me laugh sometimes at promos, even though I find some of it might be unintentional. And number 3, falling 1 spot, is Ric Flair, the NWA champion. The only reason Flair isn't higher than this is because it's hard to have like a really good feud when you're constantly traveling the world. So he has a great feud with Butch Reed. I think that's his best feud of 1982 so far, honestly, in my opinion. And a lot of that has to do with Florida and Eddie Graham's booking and his territory being so great. So I think for me, I just, in his story/feud though, outside of the Butch Reed stuff, his other feuds leave a lot to be desired. Like he had a feud going on with Slaughter, but we really didn't get any payoff there, in my opinion. And number 2, going up 2 spots, Dusty Rhodes. I said it in the winter, I'll say it again. All Dusty needed was some better feuds, and he got it. He had a very entertaining feud with Ole Anderson in Georgia. And he's the best babyface on a microphone. Dusty Rhodes isn't touched by another babyface on a microphone, although Michael Hayes maybe could get there in the future. I don't think he's there in 1982, though. I think Dusty Rhodes even blows Michael Hayes out of the water in babyface promo work. So Dusty Rhodes has it all. He's just one of the best babyfaces of all time, honestly. And number 1, still one of the best villains of all time, if not the best heel of all time. Roddy Piper is still my number 1. It's the same for the winter. Like, Piper is in so many good feuds. He's great at getting under people's skin. He has classic one-liners. He has classic promos over and over and over. He's always in character as a crazy person, and yet he's not like a Bruiser Brody crazy person. Piper's not just a crazy villain. He has the layered persona that these others don't have. Piper, I think I only edge Piper out over Rhodes because Piper is the heel here. And like I said before, it's easier to rate a heel higher because they're just so entertaining when they get it right. And Piper gets it perfect. He doesn't just get it right. Piper gets it perfect.